Do you believe that a price cut of 90% of medical drugs is possible in your country? Please watch this video till the end. I will tell you in detail how Chinese government made it and the controversy about it. Welcome to China Reality. On January 15, 2025, Shanghai held its two sessions. Those familiar with China's political system know this process. Local two sessions are held first. Then the national two sessions follow. In January, Shanghai convened its two sessions. There was a member of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, CPPCC. This member, Zhang Minghua, is the director of general surgery at Ruijin Hospital, together with a total of 20 other CPPCC members. He submitted a proposal mainly about how to collect adverse reaction data for generic drugs that have been included in the National Medical Insurance Catalog under the country's centralized drug procurement policy. Drug prices have indeed been significantly reduced, which has greatly alleviated the medical burden on ordinary people. However, it has also brought another problem. At such low prices, the quality of these drugs may be unstable. So the perception among ordinary people or among doctors in our hospitals is, for example, antibiotics causing allergic reactions, blood pressure not going down, or anesthetics not working on patients. Also, cases where laxatives fail to work, or the dosage is insufficient. These are all problems. As soon as these remarks came out, they immediately resonated with many netizens. Think about it, most people generally believe that imported original drugs are better, while generic drugs and domestically produced drugs are inferior. Now that doctors themselves are speaking out, saying anesthetics don't put patients to sleep, antihypertensive drugs don't lower blood pressure, and laxatives don't work. This is alarming. As a result, a wave of heated discussion quickly arose in the media.
No sleep, no drop in blood pressure, laxatives ineffective. In such situations, what can patients do? The current situation is that there is no choice.
Blood pressure drugs don't lower blood pressure. Anesthetics fail to anesthetize. Fortunately, it was the director of general surgery at Shanghai Ruijin Hospital who spoke out. If these words had come from me, I would have been accused of spreading rumors.
On January 20th, the National Healthcare Security Administration, NHSA, sent an expert team to Shanghai to hold a special discussion with Zhang Minghua, the CPPCC member and doctor. After returning on the 21st, the NHSA also issued a statement saying that both sides had conducted thorough communication. Then, on January 24th, the situation changed again. A chief editor from DXYD, who is also a doctor named Shaya Zimin, published an article. He stated that on the website of China's Drug Regulatory Authority, among those generic drugs, there were two drugs whose bioequivalence test data were completely identical, raising suspicion of data falsification. Which two drugs? One is rosuvastatin, a lipid-lowering drug. The data for its generic version and the original drug are exactly the same. As we all know, when you replicate a drug, there should normally be some differences compared to the original. But in this case, even the digits after the decimal point are identical. How do you explain that? It gives the impression of possible fraud, doesn't it? The other drug is trimetazidine. This is the same substance that was detected in the bloodstream of swimmer Sun Yang. He said that for this drug, half of the data between the original drug and the generic drug were exactly the same. Once his article was published, it immediately caused a huge uproar. Many people said, "See, this is why generic drugs are unreliable. The data are fabricated. Can you still trust China's Drug Regulatory Authority? Drugs based on falsified data, even if we don't call them fake drugs, must be ineffective. You're giving these drugs to ordinary people while the original drugs are no longer available in hospitals. Isn't this just exploiting the public?" There is also another background factor. Recently, China's NHSA had just completed the 10th round of centralized drug procurement. During this process, the prices of many generic drugs dropped sharply. For example, enteric-coated aspirin tablets. The lowest selected price was only 0.034 yuan per tablet, and even the highest price was just over 0.04 yuan. Think about it. A pill just costing 3 or 4 cents. Many doctors came out and said, "Is this even medicine? Would you dare take a drug that costs just a few cents?" Among them, there was an injection priced at 0.22 yuan per vial. Some people said, a bottle of mineral water costs at least 1 yuan. But this injection, which is administered directly into the bloodstream, costs only 0.22 yuan. Isn't this absurd? Isn't this squeezing pharmaceutical companies to the extreme, forcing them to resort to falsification, ignoring production processes, and ultimately harming the public? The NHSA must have ulterior motives. Overall, that has been the tone of public opinion. Zhang Minghua has even been called a whistleblower on unsafe generic drugs. So how should this issue really be viewed? Why does China implement centralized drug procurement? And are China's generic drugs reliable or not? Today, I will answer these questions. First, let me provide some background. Have you noticed that this round of complaints about excessively low prices of generic drugs did not come from pharmaceutical companies, but from doctors? For example, with enteric-coated aspirin tablets priced at 3 cents, after being included in the National Medical Insurance Catalog, many doctors in Beijing hospitals said, "I don't dare prescribe this to my patients because it's too cheap." But the selected pharmaceutical companies themselves did not complain. For example, CSPC Pharmaceutical Group, which produces these aspirin tablets, said they can still make a profit. Isn't that strange? The companies aren't complaining, yet doctors are. Logically, if the price were extremely low and unbearable for manufacturers, it should be the manufacturers who complain. But instead, the manufacturers even said they still have profit margins. Why is that? They even did the math. Aspirin enteric-coated tablets were originally produced by Bayer. Generally speaking, they were launched in 1993, and domestic generic production began after 2000. The cost of the active pharmaceutical ingredient, sodium salicylate, is about 30 yuan per kilogram. How much does that translate to per tablet? The cost of the active ingredient per tablet is about 0.003 yuan, 0.3 cents. If it sells for a 0.03 yuan, that's still a tenfold margin, if you don't consider other costs. Of course, you also need to account for starch, manufacturing processes, and administrative costs. But overall, there is still profit to be made. So CSPC stated that producing a batch of 8 million tablets is still profitable. Another pharmaceutical company also said their production processes are not affected at all and fully meet standards. How much does Bayer's aspirin sell for in the United States? About 3 cents USD, which is roughly 0.2 yuan. But in the past, Bayer's aspirin in China sold for about 8 cents USD on average. And before centralized procurement, how much did domestic generic aspirin cost? Around 0.3 yuan per tablet. This time, the average price reduction was about 90%. So think about it. Domestic generic aspirin was more expensive than Bayer's original drug abroad. Is that reasonable? Therefore, in my view, a 90% price reduction for aspirin through centralized procurement is completely reasonable, and the companies themselves are not complaining. So you can see that behind centralized procurement and generic drugs, there are many underlying issues worth discussing. Let me explain them in detail. First, let's talk about China's pharmaceutical industry. China has the largest number of pharmaceutical companies in the world, over 7,000. Even the total number worldwide is less than China's. This is one of China's miracles. But China's pharmaceutical companies produce almost no original drugs. They mainly produce generics. That is another miracle. On contrast, large pharmaceutical companies like Bayer and Pfizer are multinational corporations that produce many original drugs. China, despite having so many pharmaceutical companies, has not developed strong original drug innovators. Why? Here is some background. Before China's reform and opening up, its pharmaceutical industry was very underdeveloped. It mainly produced traditional Chinese medicine. Western medicines were limited to simple generics. After reform and opening up, many regions rushed to establish pharmaceutical factories. Why? Because producing drugs was hugely profitable. Think about it. patients have no pricing power. You can't shop around. Doctors prescribe whatever they prescribe, and you have to take it. Local governments could directly approve pharmaceutical factories. Logically, pharmaceuticals should be a highly regulated industry. But in China at that time, you could gather a few people, set up a workshop, and start producing drugs. The profit margin was no less than that of illegal drugs. Later, in the last century, the state established the Drug Regulatory Authority. There was a well-known director of this agency named Zhang Xiaoyu. It was this person who brought enormous disaster to the country and its people. What exactly did he do? And what was his final fate? And do you think that a price cut of 90% is possible in your country? Please leave your comment down below. And please subscribe and like. We will bring you the update in the next video.